Hey guys, tonight we're leaving the modern world behind and stepping into the shadow of a stone giant. Picture this. You're standing at the edge of a rain-slicked muddy path, looking up, way up, at a monstrous wall of jagged grey stone that seems to tear at the brooding sky itself. The air is thick with the smell of wet earth, wood smoke, and something else. Something foul and stagnant. That's the moat. A sludgy, defensive ditch filled with rainwater, sewage, and who knows what else. A cold, damp wind cuts right through your clothes, and in the distance, you hear the metallic clang of a blacksmith's hammer and the lowing of anxious cattle. And you, with your love of central heating and antibacterial hand gel, would absolutely not survive the first 5 minutes inside. Seriously, your immune system would just wave a little white flag and surrender. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And hey, drop a comment below telling me where you're listening from and what time it is there. It's always wild to picture you all scattered across the globe, all tuning into the same medieval mystery. Now dim the lights. Maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum. And let's ease into tonight's journey together. That towering wall in front of you isn't just for show. It's a statement carved in rock. It screams power, defense, and keep out. This is the outer curtain wall, the first and most brutal line of defense. The stones are massive, rough-hewn and chilled from the constant damp. As you get closer, you have to crane your neck to see the top, where wooden hoardings, those covered platforms, jut out, allowing defenders to drop, well, unpleasant things on anyone below. The main gate is a terrifying sight. It's not just a door, it's a complex killing zone. The portcullis is a giant iron-toothed grille suspended in the gatehouse, ready to be dropped with a sickening crash at a moment's notice. Behind it, you know there's a thick, iron-banded oak gate that could withstand a battering ram. Getting in is not going to be easy or pleasant. A guard in a rust-spotted mail shirt eyes you from a narrow slit in the gatehouse, his expression bored but suspicious. You're about to enter the belly of the beast, and it's already clear that comfort and hospitality are the very last things on its mind. Historians still debate the exact psychological impact these fortresses had on the medieval mind, but standing here, feeling small and vulnerable, you get a pretty good idea. This isn't a home, it's a weapon. And you're on the wrong side of the blade. That guard's suspicious stare is your ticket inside, but the journey's just beginning. You're motioned forward onto the main entrance causeway, and your feet hit not solid ground but wood. This is the drawbridge, and it's not some charming, picturesque feature. It's a cold, calculating piece of engineering. The planks are worn smooth by countless boots and cartwheels, and they groan under your weight. A wrong step near the edge reveals a dizzying glimpse of the murky moat below, its stagnant, foul-smelling water a good 20-foot drop away. This bridge isn't just for crossing. It's a final checkpoint, a vulnerable bottleneck designed to be eliminated in seconds. You can almost feel the tension in the thick chains and ropes that hold it aloft, knowing that with one signal they could be cut, sending this entire pathway and anyone on it crashing down into the filth. You hurry across, the sense of exposure making your skin crawl. Now you're in the gatehouse tunnel, and the world suddenly gets dark, cold, and very, very claustrophobic. The temperature drops instantly. You're enveloped in the smell of damp stone, cold iron, and the faint, acrid scent of old fear. This isn't a hallway. It's a death trap. The ceiling is low, the passage narrows, forcing you into single file. You look up and see murder holes, dark square openings in the vaulted ceiling above you. From those holes, defenders could rain down anything from boiling water and hot sand to quicklime and arrows on anyone stuck in this confined space. The walls themselves seem to press in, and you can feel the eyes of unseen watchers from narrow arrow slits on either side. Every single architectural feature is designed for one thing: killing efficiently. And here's a terrifying little fact you didn't know: many gatehouse tunnels weren't straight. They often included sharp right-angle turns, or were built in a zigzag pattern. This wasn't bad design. It was genius. It prevented attackers from getting a running start at the inner doors with a battering ram, and made it impossible to see what was waiting for you around the corner. It also created more wall space for those deadly arrow slits, allowing defenders to shoot into the trapped crowd from multiple angles. Historians still unearth remnants of these brutal gatehouses, and the chilling efficiency of the design is enough to make your blood run cold. You finally burst out into the open air of the outer bailey, but the relief is short-lived. You've made it inside, but you've just walked through the castle's teeth, and the beast is just waking up. That first gulp of air in the outer bailey feels like a triumph, but the reality is chaotic, loud, and overwhelmingly pungent. You've entered the castle's beating heart, and it's less a noble court and more a gritty medieval industrial park, mixed with a barnyard. The space is a wide, muddy courtyard, teeming with a frantic energy that's the polar opposite of the grim, calculated silence of the gatehouse. Your ears are assaulted from all sides. The clang of the blacksmith's hammer from a smoky forge, the shriek of a pig being led to slaughter, the shouts of carters arguing over space, the whinny of horses, and the constant lowing complaint of oxen. And the smells. Oh, the smells. It's a thick layered assault. Wood smoke, baking bread, animal dung, tanning hides, and the unmistakable sweet rotten scent of the butcher's yard. This is where the real work happens. This bailey is the economic engine of the entire fortress. To your left, soldiers, men-at-arms in worn leather jerkins, are drilling half-heartedly, their movements sluggish in the chill air. Near them, fletchers are patiently tying feathers to arrows, while armourers rub sand on a rusted mail shirt. To your right, a group of laundresses are boiling linens in a huge cauldron over an open fire, their faces flushed from the steam and heat. Chickens peck at scraps around your feet, and a skinny dog snarls over a bone in a corner. There's no order, no pristine beauty. It's muddy, noisy, and filthy. This is not a place for lords and ladies. It's a place for butchers, bakers, and candlestick makers, all crammed together within the safety of the walls. Their lives are whirled away from the polished fantasy of knightly chivalry. And here's a mundane, often ignored fact. The outer bailey was also a parking lot and a storage yard. Carts laden with firewood, grain, and ale are being unloaded, their wheels churning the ground into a deep, sticky muck. Tidy stacks of hay and timber are piled against the walls, ready for a siege but currently serving as perches for bored guards and climbing frames for grubby children. Historians studying castle life often note that for all its military purpose, the castle was first and foremost a busy, crowded, and often unsanitary village packed inside a wall. You have to sidestep a puddle of something best not identified, the reality of medieval life, sinking in far more effectively than any history book could manage. You've survived the gatehouse, but now you have to navigate the chaotic, smelly, and utterly alive bloodstream of the castle itself. Needing a moment to escape the overwhelming chaos of the bailey, you duck into the nearest large opening in the inner wall, a dark, echoing space that promises some respite. Wrong. You found the armory, and the air in here is even heavier. It's not the smell of animals and mud here. It's the smell of cold, old fear and neglect. The light is dim, filtering in through high, narrow windows, illuminating swirling moats of dust and rust. Racks line the walls, but they're not gleaming with polished steel. They hold rows of spears with splintering shafts, their iron heads spotted with orange blooms of corrosion. Bows lean wearily in a corner, their strings loose and frayed. A stack of shields, their wood-warped and painted designs flaking away, leans precariously against a barrel. You reach out and touch the blade of a sword left on a table. It's not the legendary Excalibur. It's a brutal, simple piece of iron, its edge nicked and dull. The grip is rough leather, stained dark with sweat and other things. This isn't a collection of priceless artifacts. It's a toolbox for violence, and the tools are worn, poorly maintained, and terrifyingly real. In the corner, a lone apprentice, looking barely old enough to shave, is listlessly rubbing a greasy rag along a mail hauberk, trying to chase away the rust. He doesn't look like a heroic squire. He looks bored and cold. This is the reality of castle defense. Not shiny heroics, but the grim, tedious upkeep of instruments of death. And here's a gritty, practical fact you didn't know. Maintaining weapons and armor was a constant, losing battle against the damp. Rust was the enemy within. A knight's magnificent suit of plate armor, a nightmare to keep functional. It required hours of meticulous scrubbing with sand and vinegar by his squires to prevent it from literally falling apart. The romantic image of knights in shining armor conveniently forgets the army of bored teenagers working behind the scenes to stop that armor from turning into a wearable tetanus factory. Historians examining archaeological finds often note the sheer amount of broken, repaired, and rebroken equipment. Warfare was hard on gear, and the armory was less a treasure vault and more a grimy, chaotic repair shop where the stakes of a shoddy job were literally life and death. You back out of the room, the taste of metal dust in the air. The romance of chivalry is nowhere to be found here, just the cold, hard and rusty truth of medieval combat. Leaving the grim reality of the armory, a new scent pulls you deeper into the inner ward, a scent that is somehow both enticing and unsettling. It's the smell of wood smoke, roasting meat, and an underlying greasy staleness. You follow your nose to a large, low building leaning against the inner curtain wall. This is the kitchen, the steaming, chaotic heart of the castle's stomach. The heat hits you first, a solid wall of it, blasting from a fireplace so massive you could park a small car in it. Spits the size of small trees are turned by sweating, soot-streaked kitchen boys, each rotation revealing whole sides of oxen and pigs, sizzling over the flames, their fat dripping and crackling on the coals below. The noise is a cacophony of culinary violence. Cleavers thwack against heavy wooden blocks, chopping through bone and sinew, cauldrons large enough to bathe in bubble, and seethe over smaller fires filled with murky stews and broths. Scullions, their arms red from scalding water, scrub pots with sand, while the head cook, a giant of a man with a face permanently flushed beet red, bellows orders that are half drowned out by the general din. There are no recipes, just tradition and brute force. Hygiene is a foreign concept. A dropped vegetable is quickly scooped up and tossed back into the pot. The floor is a slippery film of grease, discarded scraps and ash. This isn't a place of delicate sauces and presentation. It's a factory for calories, producing fuel for hundreds of people twice a day. And here's a stomach-churning fact you didn't know. The most common seasoning wasn't exotic spices, but vast quantities of salt, used to preserve meat that was often on the verge of turning. That enticing smell of roasting meat often masked the faint off-putting tang of something that was perhaps a few days past its prime. Historians studying castle accounts find orders for staggering amounts of saltfish and salt meat, the dreary backbone of the noble diet. The feast you might imagine in the Great Hall was built on a foundation of hard, preserved and frequently questionable ingredients, transformed into something palatable by the sheer power of fire and strong herbs. You watch a kitchen boy struggle with a giant kettle of pottage, and you realize the true castle magic wasn't in swords or sorcery. It was in the logistical nightmare of feeding an army of mouths every single day, with no refrigeration and a very limited menu. It's a miracle anyone survived dinner. That rich, greasy smell from the kitchen leads you to the one place in the castle designed for something resembling leisure, the Great Hall. You push open a heavy, iron-strapped door and step inside. The space is vast, a cavern of cold stone and shadow. High, narrow windows let in slants of dusty light, failing to fully illuminate the far corners. The air is a complex cocktail of scents, the lingering aroma of yesterday's feast. Roasted meat, ale, and herbs, now overlaid with the smell of damp rushes underfoot and wood smoke from the gigantic hearth at the far end. But there's another note, a faint, sour odor of spilled wine and unwashed bodies that has seeped into the very timber of the long tables. This is the stage for castle society. The Lord's high table sits on a raised dais, a position of symbolic power and better draught avoidance. The lower tables where you'd be sitting are simply long planks on trestles, scarred by knife marks and stained dark by countless meals. The floor isn't stone. It's covered in a thick layer of rushes and straw, a medieval carpet that's changed. Infrequently, within this fragrant bedding, you can find old bones, bits of bread, and other less identifiable debris. It's not just for comfort. It's for absorbing spills and, somewhat less effectively, for providing a bit of insulation against the cold stone beneath. This is where the castle gathers to eat, to conduct business, to be entertained, and to reinforce the strict social hierarchy that keeps the whole system running. And here's a messy historical truth. Those rushes on the floor were a biohazard waiting to happen. They were supposed to be replaced regularly with fresh, sweet-smelling herbs like meadow sweet and lavender. But in practice, they were often left to fester for weeks, even months, accumulating food scraps. Animal droppings, dogs and even pets like monkeys were common at meals, and other waste. Historians still debate how often floors were actually cleaned, with some accounts suggesting the old rushes were simply covered with new layers, creating a fragrant, decomposing archaeological record of every meal eaten for a season. So while the Lord dined on venison at the high table, his feet were probably resting on a months-old history of spilled pottage and gnawed mutton bones. The grandeur of the great hall was quite literally built on a foundation of filth. You take a seat on a hard wooden bench, the reality of medieval hospitality, feeling significantly less romantic than the stories suggest. After the boisterous, grimy spectacle of the great hall, you seek a quieter space. A narrow, twisting staircase leads you upward, the stone steps worn smooth and uneven by centuries of use. You emerge into a private chamber, and the first thing that hits you is the cold, a bitter, damp chill that seems to seep from the very stones. This is the Lord's solar, his private bedroom and retreat, but there's no four-poster bed with velvet curtains. Instead, there's a large wooden box-like structure built into an alcove, its heavy curtains drawn back to reveal a mattress stuffed with straw and topped with coarse woolen blankets. The room is sparsely furnished, a chest for clothes, a small table, a single expensive-looking candle burning to push back the gloom. The wind whistles faintly through the narrow window slit, which is covered with a scrap of oiled parchment, doing little to keep out the cold. You run a hand over the wall. It's cold and slightly damp to the touch. The idea of privacy is relative. You can still hear the muffled sounds from the courtyard below and the distant clang from the forge. This is the best accommodation in the castle, and it's brutally austere. Comfort as we know it simply doesn't exist. The bed, while a sign of status, is likely home to more than just the Lord. Fleas, lice, and other pests would have been constant, unwelcome bedfellows. Any heat comes from a small, smoky fireplace that does little more than take the edge off the pervasive cold. This isn't a sanctuary. It's a slightly more comfortable version of the stone fortress that surrounds it, and here's an intimate, uncomfortable fact. These chambers were often just as public as the hall below. The Lord might receive close advisors here, conduct private business, or even hold audience from his bed if he were ill. The concept of a truly private personal space is a modern luxury. Historians studying castle layouts note that even the most private rooms were still thoroughfares for servants and officials. The Lord was never truly alone, never truly off duty. His wealth showed not in lavish comfort, but in the sheer number of people who required his attention and the weight of the decisions made in this cold, stone room. You shiver, pulling your own clothes tighter around you. The grandeur of lordship feels like a very cold, very public burden. The noise, the cold, the lack of privacy. It's a potent reminder that even at the top of the feudal pyramid, life was harsh, exposed, and crawling with tiny, biting reminders of your own mortality. Seeking a different kind of quiet, you leave the Lord's cold chamber and find a small, understated door tucked into a corner of the keep. Pushing it open, you're met with a profound, echoing silence, a stark contrast to the chaos of the bailey and the grimness of the private rooms. This is the castle's chapel. The air is still and cool, smelling of old stone, beeswax from the few candles flickering near the small altar, and a faint, dry scent of incense, long since burned. It's a simple space, a few rough-hewn pews, a stone altar draped in a clean though worn linen cloth, and a small, beautifully carved wooden statue of the Virgin Mary, her face serene in the dim light. This is the spiritual heart of the fortress, a place for solace, prayer, and a desperate grasping for hope in a world defined by violence and uncertainty. Here the Lord might pray for victory in battle, his lady for a healthy childbirth, and a common soldier for simply surviving the next patrol. The walls are thick, muffling the outside world to a distant murmur. It's one of the only places in the entire castle where you can't hear the constant clang of industry or the lowing of livestock. For a few precious moments, the relentless pressure of medieval life seems to lift. It's a room designed for introspection and fear, in equal measure, fear of earthly enemies and fear of divine judgment. And here's a subtle historical detail often missed. The castle chapel wasn't just for the nobility. It served the entire household, from the highest knight to the lowest scullion. It was a rare space where the rigid social hierarchy of the castle softened slightly, if only before God. Everyone knelt on the same cold stone floor. Historians note that the presence of a well-appointed chapel was a mark of status, but its use was universal. The prayers whispered here were likely less about theology and more about raw human need. Pleas for safety, for health, for a good harvest, or for forgiveness for things done to survive another day. You sit in the quiet gloom, the candle flames dancing in the draught, and for the first time you feel a sense of peace within these oppressive walls. But it's a fragile peace, built on faith and surrounded by an ocean of turmoil. That profound quiet of the chapel still lingers in your mind as you absent-mindedly run your hand along the cold stone wall on your way out. Your fingers catch on something unexpected, a slight give in what should be solid, unmortared rock. You pause, pressing harder. With a soft grating sound, a section of the wall, perfectly disguised by the shadows and the rough-hewn texture of the stone, pivots inward. A damp, cold breath of air, smelling of earth and secrets, washes over you. You've found one of the castle's hidden arteries, a secret passage. The opening is narrow, forcing you to turn sideways and shuffle into the darkness. The passage is tight, barely wider than your shoulders and so low you have to stoop. The only light comes from the sliver behind you, quickly fading to an inky blackness ahead. The walls are cold, rough and slick with a faint, clammy moisture. Your breathing echoes too loudly in the confined space. This isn't a grand, dramatic staircase. It's a claustrophobic, utilitarian tunnel designed for one thing, moving unseen. It's a route for spies to gather intelligence, for messengers to deliver urgent news during a siege, or for the Lord and his family to make a desperate escape if the walls were breached. It speaks of paranoia and the constant lurking fear of betrayal or attack from within. And here's a thrilling, little-known fact. Many of these passages weren't marked on any official plan. Their existence was a closely guarded secret, known only to the castle's lord, his most trusted constable, and the masons who built them. Some were even deliberately built with dead ends or traps to confuse any intruder who might discover them. Historians and archaeologists still find new ones hidden within the walls of famous castles, their original purposes often lost to time. Was this a route to a spy hole overlooking the Great Hall? An escape route to the river? You can't tell. You can only stand in the pressing darkness, feeling the weight of the castle's stone all around you, and realize that the real secrets of this fortress aren't in its grand halls, but in these silent stone veins hidden just behind the walls. The castle isn't just a building. It's a labyrinth of whispers and lies. You retreat from the suffocating darkness of the secret passage, the cold, secretive air still clinging to your clothes like a ghost. Needing to feel the sky above you again, you find the narrow, spiraling staircase that leads to the castle's highest point, the watchtower. The stairs are a dizzying, tight coil of worn stone, each step uneven and treacherous. You climb and climb, your legs burning, the world below narrowing to a distant, muffled hum. Finally, you push open a heavy wooden trapdoor and emerge into the open air. And the wind immediately tries to steal the breath from your lungs. You're at the very top of the world, and it is a lonely, exposed place. The view is breathtaking, a panoramic map of the Lord's domain with patchwork fields, winding rivers, and dark forests stretching to the horizon. But the beauty is secondary to the purpose. This is a sentinel's post. The wind is a constant biting force, whipping at your hair and clothes, carrying with it the scent of rain and distant pine. A single guard is huddled here, wrapped in a thick, greasy cloak, his eyes perpetually scanning the distance. He nods at you, his face red and raw from the elements, his expression one of profound boredom mixed with hyper-vigilance. This is his life. Hours of mind-numbing monotony, punctuated by moments of sheer terror. And here's a chilling fact you didn't know. The watchtower guard's most important tool wasn't his sword or his bow. It was his eyes and his knowledge of the landscape. He had to memorize every inch of the territory, knowing what normal looked like so he could spot the abnormal, the suspicious dust cloud of an approaching force, the unnatural absence of smoke from a village hearth, the glint of sunlight on distant armor. Historians note that many castles maintain detailed watchbooks describing the normal state of the land. In fog, rain, or darkness, his job became a nightmare of uncertainty. This solitary figure, shivering at the top of the stone world, was the castle's earliest warning system, its human radar. His comfort was irrelevant. His endurance was everything. As you stand there, buffeted by the wind, the castle below seems less like a fortress and more like a stone ship, and you're alone in the crow's nest, watching for storms on the horizon. Descending from the wind-lashed isolation of the watchtower, you seek a space that feels more lived in, more human. You find it in the knight's quarters, a long barracks-like hall attached to the inner wall. The air here is a thick masculine blend of sweat, leather oil, and the faint metallic scent of chainmail. It's warmer than the Lord's solar, thanks to the body heat of dozens of men and a large central hearth where a low fire smolders. But it's far from cozy. Simple cots line the walls, each with a thin straw mattress and a coarse wool blanket. Chests at the foot of each bed hold a man's worldly possessions, an extra tunic, a whetstone, a prayer book, perhaps a lucky charm. This is where the castle's muscle sleeps, trains and lives when not on duty. The atmosphere is a mix of camaraderie and weary exhaustion. A group of younger men are honing their sword skills in a cleared space, the rhythmic ring of practice blades, a familiar sound. Older knights sit on their cots, repairing gear or gambling with dice. There are no privacy screens, no personal space. Your life is on display. Your snoring, your conversations, your fears. The room is functional and stark, a reflection of a life dedicated to warfare and service. The romance of chivalry is worn thin here, replaced by the practical realities of maintaining gear, enduring boredom, and preparing for the brutal chaos of combat. And here's a fact that strips away another layer of knightly myth. The famous code of chivalry was an ideal, not a daily reality. In these close quarters, hierarchies were strict and often enforced with fists. Hazing of new squires was common, and disputes over loot, status, or perceived insults could flare into violent arguments. Historians studying medieval military life note that a knight's daily existence was often less about noble quests and more about grinding routine, petty squabbles, and the constant grinding pressure to be ready to kill or die on command. The smell of oiled leather and men is the smell of that readiness. It's a room charged with potential violence, where the line between brotherhood and rivalry is as thin as a blade's edge. You step back out, leaving the sound of clashing practice swords behind, the human cost of the castle's defense feeling much more immediate. Leaving the charged atmosphere of the knight's quarters, your stomach reminds you of a more basic need. You follow the scent of grain and the faint, musty odor of rodents to a stout, heavily barred door set into the base of the keep. This is the granary, the castle's true treasure vault. The guard here doesn't care about swords or status. He cares about the key he holds. He gives you a suspicious once-over before unlocking the door. Inside, the air is cool, dry, and thick with dust. It's dark, with only a few slits of light high on the walls illuminating towering mounds of sacks and barrels. This is the wealth that truly matters. Sacks of wheat, barley, and rye, along with barrels of saltfish, lentils, and beans. This is the food that will see the castle through a winter or a siege. Running your hand over a rough hemp sack, you feel the hard, tiny kernels within. This grain is power. It's more valuable than gold plate or jeweled swords. Without this, the knights are just hungry men in metal suits. The walls are just stone and the castle falls. The silence in here is profound, a stark contrast to the noise of the kitchens. It's the silence of stored energy, of calculated survival. You can see why it's so heavily guarded. A single spark, a successful raid by an enemy, or just rampant rot could doom everyone inside. The fate of the entire community rests on the preservation of these dry, dusty stores. And here's a gritty logistical fact. Weevils and rodents were a constant, losing battle. No matter how well you guarded the door, pests would find a way in. Castle accounts show regular payments for cats, not as pets but as skilled pest control officers. Historians examining grain storage records from medieval castles often find notes of losses to vermin that could wipe out a significant portion of the stores. So that bread you ate in the Great Hall, it almost certainly contained a certain protein supplement. The granary wasn't just a pantry. It was a front line in a silent war against starvation, a war fought against tiny, relentless enemies that could defeat the strongest knight. You back out of the room, the guard locking the door firmly behind you. The true measure of the castle's strength isn't in its height, but in the depth of its larders. A different kind of chill draws you now, one that has nothing to do with the wind. In a quiet, secluded corner of the inner ward, away from the forge's heat and the kitchen's steam, you find a simple stone wellhead. This is the castle's lifeline. You lean over the low wall and peer down. It's a dizzying drop into absolute blackness. A faint, damp mineral smell rises from the depths. You can't see the water, but you can hear it. A distant, echoing drip that seems to come from the very belly of the earth. Someone lowers a wooden bucket on a creaking rope, the sound echoing for what feels like an eternity before a distant splash signals success. This well is everything. It is the difference between holding out for a year under siege and surrendering in a week. Its water quenches thirst, cooks food, brews beer, and puts out fires. But that deep, dark hole is also a place of profound vulnerability. It's a fixed point, impossible to move or easily defend if the outer walls are breached, and it holds its own dangers. The water, while life-giving, is not the purified, treated stuff you're used to. It tastes of stone and iron, and it can hide other invisible threats. The well is a constant, quiet anxiety for the castle's constable. Is it deep enough? Will it run dry? Could an enemy poison it? Its simple stone curb is the most important piece of architecture in the entire fortress, and here's a hydrological fact that kept castle lords awake at night. Digging a successful well through rock to a reliable aquifer was a monumental task, often more challenging than raising the walls themselves. Some castles, built on rocky outcrops for defense, suffered from perpetually poor water supply, relying on precarious rainwater catchment systems. Historians studying siege accounts often find that a castle's fall was directly linked to the failure of its well, either through drought, sabotage, or contamination. That distant drip in the darkness is the sound of the castle's heartbeat. You drop a small pebble over the edge, listening for the splash, and it takes a surprisingly long time to come. The well doesn't just hold water. It holds the depth of their dependence on the earth itself and the terrifying fragility of that dependence. Leaving the profound silence of the well, a potent and entirely different aroma guides you, a rich animal smell of hay, manure, and warm leather. You follow it to a long, low building nestled against the inner curtain wall, the stables. The air here is thick and warm, a stark contrast to the castle's cold stone. The sound is a symphony of soft snorts, the steady crunch of horses chewing oats, the stamp of a heavy hoof on straw-laden stone, and the low, soothing murmurs of stable hands at work. In the dim light, you see the castle's true engines of war and status, massive destriers, their muscular bodies gleaming in the shadows, alongside lighter palfreys for riding and sturdy draft horses for labor. This is where the castle's mobility is housed. A knight's value was tied intrinsically to his horse. It was his battlefield taxi, his status symbol, and a living, breathing weapon. The animals are well cared for, brushed until their coats shine, their tack cleaned and hung neatly nearby. But it's not a peaceful petting zoo. The confined space is charged with a powerful nervous energy. A stallion kicks at his stall door, the impact echoing like a drumbeat. The sheer size and strength of these animals is humbling. They are cared for not out of sentimentality, but out of sheer necessity. A lame horse could be a death sentence for its rider in battle, or a crippling blow to the castle's logistics. And here's a fact that redefines medieval logistics. The stable was arguably more vital than the knight's quarters. Their castle's hayloft had to be perpetually stocked with an enormous amount of fodder. Each horse could consume over 20 pounds of hay and grain a day. The manure pile was a small mountain, constantly carted away to be used as fertilizer, but its smell was a permanent feature of castle life. Historians calculating the supplies for a siege often start with the horses. They were the first to starve if things went wrong. The warmth of the stable, the smell of hay and leather, hides a dark calculation. These beautiful, powerful creatures were treasured assets, but they were also a massive drain on resources and a constant looming vulnerability. You rest your hand on a warm velvety nose, feeling the animal's breath, and understand that the castle's strength is built on 4 legs as much as on 2. A sharp, acrid smell cuts through the warm organic scent of the stables, the smell of vinegar, of pungent herbs, and something faintly metallic. It leads you to a small, quiet chamber near the barracks, its door slightly ajar. Inside, the air is still and smells of desperation. This is the infirmary. A lone, weary-looking woman, the castle's healer, perhaps the lord's wife or a knowledgeable servant, is grinding something in a mortar. Bunches of drying herbs hang from the low ceiling, and a small brazier fills the room with a thin medicinal smoke. On a simple pallet in the corner, a young soldier lies shivering, his face pale, a bandage stained with dark red wrapped around his thigh. This is where the consequences of castle life are dealt with. There are no doctors here, only practical knowledge passed down through generations. The tools on a small table are chillingly simple. A sharp knife for cutting away damaged flesh, a bone saw, needles and thread for stitching, and a cautery iron heating in the brazier's coals to sear wounds shut. Treatment is a brutal gamble. Herbal poultices might fight infection, or they might do nothing. A broken limb might be set, but it will likely heal crooked. Surgery is agony without effective pain relief, and the risk of death from infection is terrifyingly high. This room is a testament to pain, to hope, and to the grim acceptance of suffering. And here's a medical reality that was a death sentence. A simple puncture wound from a rusty arrowhead or a deep cut could lead to lockjaw or gangrene. Hence, there was absolutely nothing anyone could do about it. The healer's knowledge was a mix of observed efficacy and pure superstition. Historians studying medical texts from the period find remedies that range from the semi-logical, honey on wounds for its antiseptic properties, to the utterly baffling, applying dung to injuries. The line between medicine and magic was blurry at best. Survival often had less to do with treatment and more with the individual's constitution and a great deal of luck. You watch the healer wipe the soldier's brow, her face a mask of concentration and helplessness, and you understand that in this fortress of stone and steel, the human body remains the weakest, most vulnerable point. The true siege was often against the invisible army of bacteria that no wall could keep out. Leaving the somber atmosphere of the infirmary, you seek a different kind of knowledge. You find it behind a heavy iron-studded door that groans on its hinges. The air that washes out is ancient, dry, and smells of dust, slow decay, and beeswax. This is the castle's scriptorium and library, a room that feels worlds away from the violence and grime outside. It's a small, cold chamber. A single high window lets in a thin beam of light, illuminating motes of dust dancing like tiny spirits. A lone scribe, hunched on a hard stool, is meticulously copying a legal document, his quill scratching a soft, rhythmic counterpoint to the distant sounds of the castle. His fingers are stained with ink, and he blows on the parchment to dry it. This is where the castle's memory and administration live. The walls are lined with chests and shelves, not with books as you know them, but with rolled parchments and a few precious leather-bound volumes chained to their desks. These are estate records, tax rolls, copies of laws, and perhaps a single beautifully illustrated Bible. This isn't a place for leisurely reading. It's a place of record-keeping, of accounting, of enforcing the Lord's will through the power of the written word. The knowledge here is practical, legal, and financial. It's the paperwork of power. The silence feels heavy, learned, and fragile. And here's a fact that redefines medieval literacy. The ability to read and write was a form of power as potent as any sword, and it was fiercely guarded. The scribe is likely a cleric, one of the few who possesses this skill. His work is tedious but immensely powerful. He translates the Lord's spoken commands into permanent, enforceable law. A single error in a tax record could ruin a family. A well-worded letter could avert a war. Historians often find that the real control of a medieval estate was wielded not just by the knight with the sword, but by the clerk with the quill. The chill in this room isn't just from the stone, it's from the cold, precise application of power through text. You watch the scribe work, and you realize that the scratch of his pen is the sound of the castle's conscience, its memory, and its relentless, bureaucratic will to endure. Her sudden, rhythmic thump, 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 and a wave of blistering heat pull you from the silent, inky world of the scriptorium. You follow the sound to an open-sided shed, where the very air shimmers with intensity. This is the blacksmith's forge, the castle's fiery heart. The smell is overwhelming, a mix of burning coal, searing metal, and acrid sweat. The blacksmith, a giant of a man with arms like knotted rope and a leather apron blackened by soot, is a demon in the glow of the furnace. He pulls a glowing orange bar of iron from the coals with long tongs, lays it on his anvil, and begins to beat it with a hammer. Each strike is a deafening clang that vibrates deep in your chest, sending sparks flying like angry fireflies. This is where the castle's bones are made and mended. It's not just about swords and armor. The smith repairs plowshares, forges nails for construction, makes hinges for doors, and crafts horseshoes. His work is constant, loud, and essential. The floor is a layer of packed earth and ash, and the tools are simple, brutal, and effective: hammers, tongs, files, and the quenching barrel of water that hisses and steams like a living thing when a red-hot piece of metal is plunged into it. There is no romance here, only the transformation of raw material into vital function through sheer force, fire, and skill. And here's a fiery little secret. The blacksmith was often one of the most valued and well-treated craftsmen in the castle, sometimes even excused from military duties. His knowledge was alchemical and absolutely critical. He wasn't just a brute. He was a master of heat and carbon, knowing exactly how to temper a blade to make it hard but not brittle, or how to work iron into resilient springiness for a trap. Historians note that the forge was also a social hub, a warm place to gather in winter, a source of news and gossip, and a background rhythm to daily castle life. You step back from the intense heat, your face flushed, the ringing in your ears a testament to the power being harnessed here. The castle's strength isn't just in its stones, it's in the fire that shapes the metal that holds it all together. Seeking a respite from the forge's thunder, you find a quieter, greener space tucked against a sunlit wall. This is the castle's herb garden, a small, orderly grid of earth that feels like a whispered secret. The air here is a complex perfume of rosemary, thyme, sage, and mint, a stark and welcome contrast to the prevailing scents of animals, smoke, and sweat. Bees hum lazily from flower to flower, and the sun feels warmer in this sheltered spot. A woman, perhaps the healer you saw earlier, is on her knees carefully harvesting sprigs of lavender into a woven basket. This small patch of controlled nature is an oasis of calm and purpose. But this isn't just a pretty garden. It's an outdoor pharmacy and pantry. Every plant has a use. The rosemary is for seasoning meat and aiding memory, the sage for cleansing wounds and flavoring fatty meats, the mint for soothing upset stomachs and freshening breath. The lavender will be used to scent linens and ward off moths. This small plot represents a deep, practical understanding of the natural world, a knowledge crucial for health, cooking, and daily comfort. It's a place of small, quiet power, tended almost exclusively by women, whose expertise in herbs was often their most valued asset. And here's a fragrant historical footnote. Many of these castle gardens included plants we'd consider purely ornamental today, but they were grown for intensely practical reasons. Marigolds were used to treat skin inflammations and add color to food. Roses weren't just for beauty. Their hips were a vital source of vitamin C during long winters, and their petals were used in baths and potpourris to mask the ever-present odors of life. Historians studying plant remnants at castle sites find evidence of this sophisticated horticulture, a testament to the need for self-sufficiency. This garden is a fight against the grimness of medieval life, a small defiant claim to health, flavor, and a little bit of beauty. You brush your hand against a rosemary bush, releasing its sharp, clean scent, and for a moment, the castle doesn't feel like a fortress at all, but like a home. The scent of rosemary still lingers on your fingers as you leave the garden's sanctuary, but the illusion of peace is quickly shattered. A new sound pulls you toward the outer bailey, not the clash of training swords or the hammer of the smith, but the rhythmic thwack of arrows hitting straw and the tense silence that follows. This is the archery butts, the castle's training ground for its most critical defensive weapon. The air here is less about brute force and more about focused precision. You see rows of men, their bodies taut with concentration, drawing back longbows that stand taller than they are. The release of the string is a sharp thrum, a vibration you feel in your teeth, followed by the satisfying thud of an arrow, embedding itself in the distant straw target. This is where the castle's true long-range power is honed. The longbow isn't a knight's weapon. It's the weapon of the yeoman, the commoner, the foot soldier. Mastering it requires years of brutal, repetitive practice that reshapes the body. A trained archer's skeleton often shows deformities in the shoulder and drawing arm. The atmosphere is serious, competitive. Missing a target brings jeers. A clean hit brings grudging respect. Veils of straw are littered with arrows, looking like monstrous blonde hedgehogs. This is a skill born of necessity, a democratization of violence that could humble a mounted knight from 100 yards away. And here's a fact that changed the face of medieval warfare. The English longbow, often made from yew wood, had a draw weight of up to 180 pounds, more than double that of a modern hunting bow. Firing it was not a matter of simple aim. It was a full-body effort that required immense strength and technique. Historians note that skeletons of medieval archers can be identified by their enlarged left arms and stress injuries to their shoulders and spines. The constant practice mandated by law wasn't just about skill, it was about building the specific muscles needed to wield these monstrous weapons. The quiet thwack of arrows in the straw is the sound of 100 hours of painful training. The sound of a castle ensuring that even its lowest-born defenders could strike a devastating blow against the highest-born attacker. It's a great equalizer, hidden in plain sight. The sharp thwack of arrows fades behind you as you approach a part of the castle that seems almost forgotten. Tucked against the outer curtain wall, away from the strategic hubs of the forge and the barracks, is a cluster of simple, crudely built wattle and daub huts with roofs of thatch. This is the village within the walls, where the castle's army of labourers, the potters, the candle makers, the weavers, the nakers, live. The air here is different. It smells of wood smoke, yes, but also of poverty, of unwashed bodies, of boiling cabbage, of the tannin from the leather worker's vat, and the pungent smell of tallow from the candlemaker's workshop. It's a cramped, overcrowded space. Life here is a world away from the knight's quarters or the lord's solar. Entire families live in single-room huts, their belongings few, their space shared with chickens and perhaps a scrawny pig. A woman sits in a doorway, spinning wool with a distaff, her fingers moving with tired automatic skill. Children, dressed in little more than rags, chase each other through the narrow, muddy alleys between the huts. These are the people who make the castle function, yet they live on the very edge of its protection, the first to feel the draft from the walls and the first to suffer if supplies run low. Their existence is a precarious balance between the safety of the walls and the grinding reality of their station. And here's a social hierarchy often glossed over. Within the castle's micro-society, these artisans and labourers occupied the lowest rung, even below the common men-at-arms. They were essential but largely invisible, their lives dictated by the whims of the castle's stewards and the demands of their craft. Historians piecing together their lives from refuse pits and hut foundations find evidence of a hard, meagre existence. Their diets were poorer, their health worse, but they also find small touches of humanity. A carefully repaired toy, a simple piece of jewelry. Reminders that even in the shadow of great stone walls, people sought small joys and a sense of identity. You walk through this cramped village, and the castle feels less like a unified fortress and more like a sharply divided world, where the concept of safety meant very different things depending on where you slept. A deeper, earthier scent pulls you away from the crowded huts, the smell of damp soil, fermenting fruit, and cool, still air. You find a heavy iron ring door set into a slope in the bailey, leading down into the very bedrock the castle is built upon. This is the undercroft, the castle's cold cellar. As you descend the narrow, worn steps, the temperature drops sharply, raising goosebumps on your arms. The world above, with all its noise and light, vanishes, replaced by a profound, echoing silence. The only light comes from the small, flickering oil lamp you carry, its flame dancing wildly in the draught. The space is larger than you expected, a vaulted cavern of stone. The air is thick with the smell of apples, turnips, and onions stored in barrels and bins. But the dominant aroma is the rich, fruity scent of fermentation from rows and rows of casks, the castle's wine and beer supply. This is where the castle's vital sustenance is kept cool and safe from spoilage. It feels ancient and secret, a hidden belly. Your footsteps echo and every small sound is magnified. It's easy to imagine hiding down here during a siege, listening to the muffled sounds of battle above, surrounded by the very supplies you hope will let you outlast your enemies. And here's a fact that kept cellars secure. The value of this hoard was immense. A castle's beer supply was as critical as its weaponry. Water was often unsafe, and beer provided necessary calories and hydration. The undercroft was often one of the most securely locked places in the castle, its keys held by the most trusted steward. Historians note that accounts of castle provisions always listed alcohol in staggering quantities, far more than water. But this cool, dark safety had its own danger. Cave-ins were a real threat, and the damp, stagnant air could breed mold and sickness. Your lamp flickers, casting long, dancing shadows that make the barrels look like sleeping giants. This silent, cold vault is the castle's patience, its ability to wait out any storm. But down here in the dark, that patience feels like a fragile thing. Leaving the silent, chilly darkness of the undercroft, you're drawn toward a sound that is both melodic and mournful, the clear, single note of a bell ringing from somewhere high above. You climb another set of tight, winding stairs, this time emerging onto the roof of the keep itself. The wind up here is a living force, snatching at your clothes and whipping your hair across your face. The view is staggering. You can see the entire world the castle dominates, from the winding river to the distant smoke of peasant villages. And there, in a small stone cupola, hangs the castle's voice, the warning bell. It's larger than you imagined, cast from dark, aged bronze, its surface etched with weather and time. It hangs silent now, but its rope sways gently in the wind, a promise of the clamor it can unleash. This bell doesn't call people to prayer. It screams of imminent danger. Its voice is the sound of panic, of rallying, of doors slamming shut and soldiers scrambling to the walls. Standing next to it, you can almost feel the vibration it would send through the very stones of the keep. A physical shockwave of alarm that would be felt by everyone inside the walls, a universal language of fear. And here's a sonic secret of siege defense. The bell wasn't just for general alarm. Skilled watchmen could use a coded series of rings to convey specific information, different patterns for spotting riders, for seeing smoke, or for an approaching army. It was a crude but effective early warning system. Historians have found evidence that some castles even had two bells, a smaller, sweeter-toned one for domestic timekeeping, and a larger, deeper, more ominous one reserved solely for danger. The silence of the bell now is deceptive. It is the most important instrument in the castle's orchestra, and its music is one of pure dread. You place a hand on its cold metal flank, and the wind seems to carry a whisper of the chaos it was built to create. Up here, with the world spread out below, you feel incredibly exposed and powerful all at once. You are in the castle's head, and its only thought is vigilance. Descending from the windy heights of the bell tower, you're met with a smell that is both familiar and strangely out of place. The clean, mineral scent of steam and the sharp green fragrance of crushed herbs. You found the castle's bathhouse, a small stone-built room tucked away in a quiet corner. A fire crackles under a large copper cauldron, heating water. The air is warm and humid, a stark contrast to the pervasive chill of the stone corridors. This is a rare luxury, a space dedicated not to war or work, but to the fleeting pursuit of cleanliness. But this isn't a modern spa. The tub is a large wooden barrel. The towels are rough linen. The herbs, lavender, rosemary, mint, are strewn in the water not just for fragrance but to mask body odor and deter pests. Bathing is a laborious, infrequent ritual. Water has to be hauled and heated, a significant expenditure of time and resources. This isn't a daily shower. It's a weekly, perhaps monthly event. For a short while, the constant itch of lice and the grime of daily life are held at bay. The warmth seeps into your bones, a profound relief from the constant cold. It's a small island of sensory pleasure in a world of hardship. And here's a hygienic historical hiccup. While the wealthy might have had access to such a room, the common notion that medieval people never bathed is a myth. They understood the link between cleanliness and health, but the effort involved made it a special occasion, not a daily habit. The bathhouse was also a social space, a place for conversation and deal-making. Historians note that the Crusades actually brought new bathing customs and soaps to Europe from the Middle East, but this small room represents a constant battle, not against armies, but against dirt, smell, and disease. As you sink into the warm, herb-scented water, the simplicity of the comfort is almost overwhelming. It's a fleeting victory, but a deeply felt one. For a few precious moments, you are not a subject of a fortress, but just a person, warm and clean. Tomorrow the grind and the grime will return, but for now there is only steam and silence. The lingering warmth of the bathhouse fades quickly as you step back into the castle's perpetual chill, replaced by a new acrid scent that burns your nostrils, the smell of hot wax, boiling fat and slow smoky combustion. You follow it to a small dim workshop where the castle's light is literally made. This is the chandlery. The chandler, his face smudged with soot and his arms splattered with grease, is tirelessly dipping rows of wicks into a vast vat of molten tallow, rendered animal fat. Each dip coats the wick, building up a candle layer by tedious layer. The air is thick and greasy, and the heat from the rendering pots is oppressive. This is where the battle against darkness is waged. Without these candles and the rushlights, soaked reeds dried and dipped in fat, the castle would be plunged into an inky blackness after sunset, a world of stubbed toes, fearful whispers, and paralyzed activity. The work is monotonous and foul-smelling, but absolutely vital. The better quality beeswax candles, which smell sweeter and burn cleaner, are reserved for the chapel and the Lord's table. Everyone else makes do with the smoky, sputtering and foul-smelling tallow dips. Light is a luxury, carefully rationed, and its production is a daily grimy chore. And here's an illuminating fact. The amount of light a castle could produce directly limited its activities. Detailed work like sewing, reading, or repairing gear could often only be done during daylight hours. The faint, smoky glow of a tallow candle was barely enough to eat by or navigate a familiar room. Historians studying castle inventories find that candles and rushlights were accounted for as carefully as weaponry. The chandler, though covered in grime, held a quiet, essential power over the daily rhythm of life within the walls. You watch him work, his movements rhythmic and practiced, and you understand that each candle represents hours of labor and a small victory over the overwhelming, consuming darkness of the medieval night. The castle's day doesn't end with the sun. It just gets dimmer, smellier, and a lot more hazardous. Leaving the greasy, smoky atmosphere of the chandlery, you're drawn toward a sound that is both methodical and strangely soothing, the rhythmic clack, clack, clack of a wooden loom. You follow it to a well-lit corner of the bailey, where a weaver and her apprentices are at work. The air here is filled with a fine, floating dust of wool fibers and the faint, earthy smell of raw fleece and vegetable dyes. This is the textile workshop, the castle's wardrobe department. Bolts of rough, undyed woolen cloth and finer, colored linens are stacked against the wall. The weaver's hands move with a speed and precision that seems almost magical, throwing the shuttle back and forth between the threads of the warp. Her apprentices card raw wool, their fingers moving quickly to untangle the fibers, or work at a spindle, twisting the fibers into a continuous thread. This is where the clothes for nearly everyone in the castle are made, from the rough tunics of the servants to the finer dyed wool of the knights and the linens for the lord's household. It's a constant, never-ending cycle of production and repair. The castle's population wears through clothing at an astonishing rate, and this workshop is the front line against nakedness and the cold. And here's a thread of historical detail. The colors you see in the dyed wools aren't just for show, they're a language of status. The vibrant reds from madder root, the deep blues from woad, the rich yellows from weld, these were expensive and time-consuming to produce, so their use was restricted to the nobility. The common folk wore the natural browns, greys, and off-whites of undyed wool. Historians can often determine social standing from the microscopic analysis of textile fragments found in archaeological digs. The clack of the loom is the sound of social hierarchy being literally woven into the fabric of daily life. You watch the weaver, her face a mask of concentration, and realize she isn't just making cloth. She's crafting identity, one thread at a time. The castle's need for warmth and modesty creates its own kind of art and its own unspoken rules. The rhythmic clack-clack of the loom fades as you step into a space that feels both sacred and sinister, the castle's chapel. It's not the grand, soaring cathedral of a monastery, but a small, intimate room with a single narrow window, casting a dusty beam of light onto a simple stone altar. The air is still and smells of old incense, beeswax from the few burning candles, and the faint, dry scent of stone. A carved wooden crucifix hangs on the wall, the figure's face gaunt and sorrowful. This is where the castle turns its thoughts from the earthly to the divine, a place for prayer, penance, and desperate bargaining with God. But the chapel's role is more complex than just solace. It's also a place of political power. The Lord's private pew is the most ornate, positioned for all to see his piety. The sermons preached here often reinforce the divine right of his rule, the God-given order that keeps him at the top and everyone else in their place. It's a tool for control as much as for comfort. In this quiet space you can feel the weight of that expectation, to be pious, to be obedient, to accept your lot in life as part of a grand, inscrutable plan. The silence is heavy, filled with the whispers of 1,000 fears and hopes spoken here over the decades, and here's a spiritual secret tucked behind the altar. Many castle chapels had a small, locked reliquary box containing a sacred relic, a finger bone of a saint, a piece of the true cross, a vial of dried blood. These objects were believed to offer divine protection to the castle itself. Their authenticity was often dubious, but faith in their power was absolute. Historians note that the acquisition of a prestigious relic was a major coup for a noble family, boosting the castle's spiritual status and attracting pilgrims. The chapel, therefore, wasn't just a spiritual haven. It was a vault for the castle's most valuable supernatural insurance policy. You kneel on the hard, cold stone, and the silence amplifies the beating of your own heart. In here, the battle isn't for land or title, but for salvation. And that is a siege that never ends. Leaving the hushed solemnity of the chapel, a new, more visceral scent guides you. A mixture of fresh blood, raw meat, and the sharp, clean smell of recently cut wood. You've found the butcher's yard, an open space near the kitchens where the castle's meat is prepared. The atmosphere here is one of efficient, bloody practicality. A recently slaughtered pig hangs from a wooden frame, its carcass being expertly carved by the butcher, his arms slick with blood and fat. His assistant is scrubbing the stone slab with water and sand, washing away the evidence of the work. Offal sits in a bucket, destined for sausages or the hunting dogs. This is where the animals from the castle's pens or a successful hunt are transformed into food. There's no refrigeration, so this work is done as needed, often daily. The butcher's skill is evident in his precise cuts, maximizing the yield from every carcass. Nothing is wasted. The blood is collected for black pudding, the bones for stock, the hide for tanning. It's a graphic, necessary process, a stark reminder that the food on the Lord's table comes from this bloody, physical labor. The air is cold, keeping the meat from spoiling too quickly, but the metallic tang of blood is unmistakable. And here's a fact about medieval butchery that might surprise you. The quality and quantity of meat you ate were direct indicators of your social status. The lord and his household dined on the prime cuts, the loin, the haunch. The knights and men-at-arms received the tougher, cheaper cuts that required long stewing. The lowest servants might only get the offal, the feet, or the head. Historians studying castle kitchen waste pits, middens, can literally trace the social hierarchy through the discarded bones. The butcher's block then wasn't just a workplace. It was where the social order was carved up, quite literally every single day. You watch the butcher wipe his knife on his apron, his work a bloody, essential art that fuels the entire complex organism of the castle. It's a raw, unfiltered look at the cost of survival. The metallic scent of blood from the butcher's yard still lingers in your nose as you seek a quieter, more solitary space. You find it in a small, cold room tucked high in the keep, its door slightly ajar. This is the scriptorium, a stark contrast to the visceral life of the courtyard below. The air here is dry and still, smelling of dusty parchment, drying ink, and the faint beeswaxy scent of sealing wax. A single monk, his hands stained blue and black, hunches over a sloping desk, his quill scratching a soft, rhythmic whisper across a stretched sheepskin page. This is where the castle's history is recorded, its laws copied and its accounts tallied. The silence in this room is a different kind of weight. It's the weight of knowledge, of bureaucracy, of memory being painstakingly preserved. The monk is not writing grand stories of heroism. He's likely copying a tax roll or a land grant, his work illuminated by a single precious candle, even in the daytime. The walls are lined with chests containing scrolls and a few precious chained books. This room is the castle's brain, where its business is transacted and its legacy is written. It feels disconnected from the chaos outside, a world of pure thought and record-keeping that somehow governs the very real, very bloody world beyond its door. And here's a secret hidden in the ink. The power of the scribe was immense. He could shape reality with a dip of his pen. A carefully chosen word in a legal document could transfer wealth, condemn a man, or spark a feud. The uniformity of the script, the abbreviations used, were a language in themselves, a code that granted power to those who could read and write it. Historians pore over these very documents, but they seldom feel the quiet power that radiated from the scribe himself, a man who could, with a flick of his wrist, change the fate of the illiterate world outside his door. You watch him work, his face a mask of concentration, and you understand that the scratch of his quill is mightier than the ring of the blacksmith's hammer. It is the sound of order being imposed on chaos, one word at a time. The dry, papery silence of the scriptorium is broken by a sound that is both mundane and mystifying, a low, rhythmic thump, 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 followed by the cheerful, chaotic clucking of chickens. You follow the noise to a dusty corner of the outer bailey, where a simple wooden coop leans against the sun-warmed stone of the curtain wall. This is the hen house, a small, bustling microcosm of life within the fortress. The air here is a familiar blend of dry straw, feathers, and the faint, sharp scent of ammonia. A young girl, her apron dusty and her hands competent, is scattering grain from a wooden bucket. The chickens swarm around her feet, a flurry of brown and white feathers and eager bobbing heads. This isn't just a hobby. It's a vital food source. The eggs collected daily are a precious protein supplement, especially in winter when fresh meat is scarce. The birds themselves are a living larder, to be eventually used for stew. Their constant quiet clucking and scratching is a homely, comforting sound amidst the military and industrial noises of the castle, a reminder of simple, sustaining cycles. And here's a pecking order fact. The chickens, like everyone else in the castle, had a hierarchy. The best grain was often reserved for the layers, the birds who produced the most eggs. Older, less productive hens would eventually find their way into the pot. Historians studying Castle Middens find vast quantities of chicken bones, telling a story of careful flock management. But these birds were more than food. They were alarm systems. Their frantic, startled squawking could alert guards to an intruder trying to scale the walls under cover of darkness. The humble henhouse, therefore, was both pantry and sentry post, its value far exceeding its modest appearance. You watch the girl work, her movements calm and practiced, and for a moment, the castle feels less like a weapon of war and more like a home, its heartbeat measured in the simple daily rhythm of feeding the chickens. The homely clucking of the chickens fades into the background as the light begins to soften, casting long, deep shadows across the bailey. The frantic energy of the day slowly drains away. The blacksmith's hammer falls silent, the last of the practice arrows are collected, and the great gates groan shut for the night, their heavy bars thudding into place with a sound of finality. The castle is sealing itself in. Torches are lit in their iron sconces, their flickering smoky light pushing back the encroaching darkness in small, uncertain pools. The temperature drops rapidly as the sun vanishes, the day's warmth leaching from the stone walls. Night in the castle is a different world. The sounds change. The daytime clamor of industry and command is replaced by the low murmur of watchmen on the walls, the distant hoot of an owl, the scuttle of rats in the rushes, and the endless, sighing wind that forever whispers around the towers and through the arrow slits. The cold becomes a physical presence, seeping through wool and leather, driving everyone to huddle closer to hearths that can never quite drive the damp from the air. The grandeur of the place shrinks down to the circle of firelight. The vast, intimidating fortress becomes a collection of small, dim islands of warmth and light in a sea of darkness and stone. And here's the final, quiet truth of the medieval castle. For all its imposing strength, it was a deeply vulnerable place at night. The darkness was absolute, the silence heavy with unknown threats both real and imagined. The fear of fire was constant. A single overturned candle in the rushes could doom everyone inside. The fear of betrayal, of a whispered plot or a secretly opened postern gate, haunted the lord in his chamber. Historians note that many castles had strict curfews and rules about moving around after dark, all designed to control the inherent vulnerability of the night. The castle, which seemed so invincible by day, was at its most human and most afraid when the sun went down. You stand in the growing dark, listening to the new rhythm of the night, and understand that the true test of a fortress wasn't its walls, but the courage of the people inside them, waiting alone in the dark for the dawn. Now, let the images of flickering torchlight and silent stone soften and blur. Let the distant murmur of the watchman fade into a gentle hum. The day is done. The castle sleeps, its secrets kept for another night. May your own dreams be of still waters and quiet fields, far from the cold stone and whispered fears. Rest now in the deep and knowing silence. End of script. Sweet dreams.